Present day Africa is still confronted with a dilemma that is both old and urgent, with tribalism and neocolonialism, a double bind that continues to shape Africa's political, social and economic destiny. Tribalism, once a matter of identity in Africa, is now too often a tool of division. Neocolonialism, on its part, masks in trade deals, military aid, foreign influence, silently dictates from afar the future of the African continent. Together, we do not just awaken, they do not just awaken a weakened unity, they fracture the future of a potentially rich continent. The question is not whether these forces exist, the question should be, how long will Africans let them define who they are as a people and who they can become? Ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us, this is Talking Points over for you, Media Africa. Stay with us. Hello, Africa and the world. Thank you for joining us. So it's a pleasure to be in your company. Two factors, two concepts have often plagued the African continent, that of tribalism and neocolonialism. Of course, this day we shall be having the opportunity to break down this concept while shaping the future for the African continent. And of course, we shall be having a very impactful conversation where we shall be able to see how or bring to the table suggestions on how Africa can chart the way forward to having a more prosperous continent. And this day to unveil our panel this day, I'm being joined first of all by Dr. Elijah ENOAKU in his capacity as the Director of Center for Africa Development. Good morning, sir. You're welcome on board.
Good morning, Sharon. Good morning to your viewers all over Africa, United States, or wherever they're viewing us from. Thank you for having me on the show. It's been a while. And hopefully we have a fruitful discussion about some of the things that are ailing our continent, Africa. So thanks for having me.
And we indeed look forward to a fruitful conversation where we shall be able to unpack, some of these issues that are affecting Africa. Also, away from Dr. Elijah, we've equally been joined by Dr. GNAKA LAGOKE, who is joining us in his capacity as the founding member of the Convention for Pan-Africanism and Progress, and he doubles as an Associate Professor of History at Lincoln University. Good morning, sir. It's a pleasure to have you on board.
Good morning, Sharon. I'm happy to be here.
Now, to debut today's conversation, a very important one in shaping the future of Africa, I'll debut with you, Dr. Elijah. Now, we have a mixed conception around these two concepts, that of tribalism and neocolonialism in Africa, but in a bid to explain to our audience, those watching us on 4U television or listening to us over, 4U radio, what is the most, dangerous misconceptions Africans have of these two concepts? And could you explain what they mean and why they continue to persist in Africa?
Thank you for having me, Sharon. Again, this is something that has been talked about over the years by professors. It's been researched, and up to today, there seems to be a little bit of confusion around it. Not because people do not understand it, it's because of the way it is mixed in the concepts that shape Africa. In your interlock there, you did mention about how these things are hidden underneath some of the policies that the Western world imposed on Africa, or not, I wouldn't even call it imposed, their reactions with Africa, their interactions with Africa, their influence in Africa. It's not open-ended, or it's not an open discussion within the African circles. Because if you look at some of the things that you mentioned, whether you're talking about trade, you're talking about interaction, you're talking about military services to Africa, you're talking about accords, you're talking about agreements, and so on and so forth. All that is woven into neocolonialism. Sometimes it can even come in the form of aid, and they tell you that we're giving this aid because we've had good relationship between country A or country B or country C. Our economies are interwoven. We've had good bilateral relationship. But if you go, like they say in English, that the devil is in the details. If you go into the details of such agreement and such contracts, you are going to find issues there that tells you that this is nothing but neocolonialism. So that is the complexity of that one, in such a way that it doesn't come, they don't come in the open and say, oh, we want to colonize you again, we want to do this. They come in a benign way. They come with aid, they come with services, they come with military contracts, they come with military alliances and so on. But it is for us, the Africans, to understand that we can independently exist, we can independently grow our economies without those things. Now, on the part of tribalism, you will see that democracy in Africa has missed its ways. Because if you look at democracy on the continent of Africa and they look at the way it's being implemented, you can call whatever country it is. You can call Nigeria, you can call South Africa, you can call Cameroon, you can call even the advanced ones like Botswana and so on, and Kenya. You will see that the democracy that they are practicing in that country is actually tribalism. It's not democracy. People will rather position tribal affiliations at the top of their list when they're making choices as who is going to become the president, who is going to become this, who will become this. It is not who is best suited to bring us out of a situation or to deliver on the goods. And actually, when elections are happening in Africa, there is no actual platform on which people are going to make their decision based on and say, this platform, what they are promising, it's better for the economy than A, B, C, or D. It's based on, does it come from my region? Does it come from my area? Is it my tribal person? At the end of the day, whether we elect people by hook or by crook, it becomes a tribal issue than a democracy issue. So these two issues is what is affecting Africa. Again, you have neocolonialism that comes in a hidden form, but you have open tribalism that comes as democracy, which is not tribalism. So again, before we go into the details of this, I just want to give you how these two interplay together. And our partners, who are the Western friends, we have nothing against them. Some of them are really good, but our partners play and they prey on our weaknesses. Yes, we've seen that happen all across Africa, because when we do not understand what we want, when we do not understand that we can actually be productive, be economically viable without these things, without these aids, they come in there and they manipulate us. Secondly, when we use tribalism as democracy, when we replace democracy with tribalism, they will come in one way or the other, and they will influence the election from within. And before you know it, the candidate that finally becomes the president or whatever position it is that we are trying to fill becomes the candidate of the Western powers, because they manipulate our weaknesses. So these two, that's how they interplay. But we're going to go into details as we go on.
And they continue to, feed on, the weaknesses, like you said, Dr. Elijah. According to you, Africa needs to look from within if it needs to, identify its own potential. Now, to you, Dr. NJIX, you listened to your co-panelist, Dr. Elijah, and he shares the opinion that the issue of tribal identity is a cankerworm that is a continuous threat to national unity. But amidst all these things, we're trying to advocate for Pan-African vision. From your perspective, at what point did, the issue of tribalism, if I may quote it with neocolonialism, become a political liability in Africa? And do you think this is going to go a long way in threatening the Pan-African vision that at this point is gaining momentum on the continent? Dr. NJIX,
first of all,
okay.
I don't know why my is not spotted. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Please proceed.
Can you hear me? Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, Dr. NJIX, we can hear you.
I wanted to commend you. Yeah, I wanted to thank you, and I wanted to commend you for organizing this show on that particular topic. And this is something that is missing in most of the things that we see today on the Afrocentric or Pan-African media. We don't see that kind of conversation, and we need to have that kind of conversation because, yes, we talk about imperialism. Yes, we talk about tribalism. Yes, we talk about neocolonialism. We talk about Pan-Africanism, but we need to educate ourselves and educate people, viewers. So one thing I wanted to add to what Dr. ENOAKU said about, about neocolonialism and tribalism. I just want to add the definition of the concepts, because what is neocolonialism? And we need to know. And then the conversation that we are having, our forefathers, our ancestors had that kind of conversation. And then I want to go back to Kwame Nkrumah, who wrote the book in 1965. And many people say that the book was going to be one of the factors that led to his demise, to his overthrow 1 year after the book was published in 1965. Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism. So when we go and we read the book, he laid out all the aspects of neocolonialism. If you allow me, I just want to talk about the systems of oppression and exploitation that Africa endured since the Battle of Ceuta in 1415. And then later on, when the Europeans put into place a global structure in different sectors in order to maintain their dominance over the world and in order to implement slavery. They did the same thing after the Berlin Conference, 1884, 1885, and some of the features are imperial colonial states, colonial administration, concessionary companies, and then forced labor, and then Afro-European armies. That was the system. There are many other aspects. We don't have enough time to go into all those details. So when Africa was about to gain its independence, the Europeans came together again, and then they started implementing another system. This is how everyone were talking about neocolonialism, as colonialism was dying down. So what is neocolonialism? It is a system put into place by the Europeans that Kwame Nkrumah called also collective colonialism, because even though I spoke about the common features of colonialism that each colonial state was implementing, but when Africa was about to become independent, the Europeans came together again, the same way they met at the Berlin Conference. They came together, this time with the same common features that they implemented together as a unit, and people call that collective colonialism. So as you can see, most of the things that each one of them does, this is what everyone does. And then you can have the feeling that you are independent administratively or politically, but most of the decisions will come from France, from England, or from the United States. But they the same way they have the Afro-European armies, that's the same way they want to maintain those policies. They will give the impression, and Dr. ENOAKU spoke about that, it's helpful, but even when they come, it's going to contribute to the, to the domination of the European system over Africa. This is what we need to understand about when we talk about tribalism. When it comes to tribalism, it is the tribal identity of all those ethnic groups, and then most of the time we see that many in Africa leaders they want to govern the countries based on the tribal identity, and so we have so many examples. We're not going to waste. Just I take the case of Ivory Coast, I take the case of South Africa, I take the case of Nigeria, I take the case of Kenya, where in Kenya we see since the independence of the country that the Kalenji and the Kikuyu are the only ethnic groups that have been ruling over Kenya. The Luos could not rule over Kenya, even though the Luo we had Obama's father, we have Tom Mboya, or Raila Odinga, but it somehow, for some reason, the Bluos cannot govern in Kenya. Same thing in Nigeria, where after Nnamdi Azikiwe was the first president and Igbo man, after the civil war, we seem to see a covenant between the Yorubas, the Hausa, and many others in the north and the northern part of Nigeria, seem to be preventing an Igbo guy to be president in Nigeria. In South Africa, we had the Zulu issue, and then which led almost South Africa into a civil war. All those elements, as Kwame Nkrumah said, it is only when we promote a Pan-African vision, this is how we can transcend our ethnic identities, and then we can think about an Africa that goes beyond those ethnicities, so that we can charter a society in which we can, based on merit and based on a stronger vision of Africa, so that we can fight against neocolonialism. That will be my first answer to your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. NJIX. I'll be coming back to you subsequently for us to, further analyze the response you gave so far. But then back to you, Dr. Elijah. You're an expert in the area of development in Africa, given you're the Director of Centers for Africa Development. Now, when you look at the various aids in terms of developments that are coming to Africa, you mentioned in your previous response that be it military, be it at the level of resources, be it the aid that is coming to Africa, they all come with some sort of disguise. But then, what's your assessment of how this development funding, the foreign investment we're getting on the African continent, or be it international institutions, the modus operandi may go a long way in perpetuating neocolonial structures within Africa?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Because if you look at the way developed countries deal with Africa, I can tell you that going through documentation upon documentation and going through a lot of research on papers on every single aid, this is not an exaggeration, every single aid that Africa receives, be it from multinational corporations, be it from countries, be it from individuals, there are always strings attached. And sometimes it's based on our politicians and economists and opinion leaders and civil societies to dissect some of those aids and let our people know what we are going into. Because they create dependencies, and their intention is to create dependencies. They do not. If you look at the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and so on, and all these Bretton Woods institutions, their aim is not to create independence. Their aim is to create dependencies.
True.
And they create those dependencies through trade imbalances, through debts, through conditional aid, and so on. When you have a trade imbalance with a country, when you have a loan with a country, if you look at the weight on which African countries are suffering now, it's debt. When you consider those debts and you look at the ratio between debt to service ratio on African countries, name one, whether it's Nigeria, whether it's South Africa, look at their debt to service ratio. Look at the amount of money that that country is spending, not to pay debts, but to service the debt. They're not paying the debt yet. They're servicing the debt. If you look at it, you just conclude that this is nothing but slavery. It's far from neocolonialism. It is slavery. Because if you spend all your life servicing the debt of your creditor, you're not actually paying the debt. It means it's going to be very difficult to even come to a point where you're paying that debt. Look at the political influence. Look at the political interventions that these countries have in Africa and the accords that they have with African countries. Whether you're talking about Cote d'Ivoire, Cameroon, and so on, look at the accord that they have. Whether it's military accord, whether it's a specific accord, whatever it is, you name one, all is geared towards influence and control of the less developed countries, especially in Africa. Look at the cultural imperialism on the continent of Africa. We don't have our own culture that is being propagated. We have foreign cultures and foreign ideas. Look at the currency on the continent of Africa, with the exception of few. Those are foreign-based currencies. Look at the reserves of African countries. You have countries in Europe and the Western world that do not have deposit of gold, for example. And gold is the standard for currency backup. It is gold that backs the currency of every country. If you look at France, maybe we can say the exception of Canada and the United States because they do have gold mines in their country. But look at European countries specifically. Very few, if any, has any gold mine. But if you look at their gold reserves that back the currency of those countries, some of them come between, if you are counting 1, 2, 3, 4, countries like France, I think they come around number 8, and most countries in the European Union, they are right there at the top. How do they get that gold that backs their currency? They get it from Africa. What is happening with African currency? African currency is floating, it is waste, it is nonsense, it can't even compete with this economy. They use imperialism and all these neo-colonial tactics to gain that gold from Africa. So there are so many things happening, Sharon, that the Western world uses. That's why I said neo-colonialism, it's not like before, like my colleague said, where we had the Berlin conference that they sat together, they divided Africa, they put all those strings attached. Right now, it's happening unabated because we Africans are falling prey to it. We are falling prey to it. If you look across Africa, a lot of few countries that have rejected aid, they come after them. Why would you come after somebody who says, I don't need your money? Why wouldn't that be a good thing that the West should celebrate? Why would that be a bad thing that they will criticize or look at different sectors of the economy and say your economy is bad, is weak, if you don't have this money, you cannot come out of this? Why should that be an issue? That tells you that the aid that given to Africa is aid with strings attached. Now, on the part of tribalism that my colleague mentioned there, this is how they use tribalism with neo-colonialism to defeat us. We are talking about Pan-Africanism, for example. My colleague already mentioned a few countries. If you go to those countries and you're talking about national unity, working together, even unity in diversity and so on,
exactly,
what you're going to come out with is going to shock you. If you take Nigeria, for example, a country that I'm quite familiar with, I've been in that country, I've done a lot of research. It would appear an Igbo man does not consider himself he considers himself more of an Igbo man than a Nigerian. A Yoruba man considers himself more of a Yoruba man than a Nigerian. A Hausa man considers himself more of a Hausa man than a Nigerian. Take any country in Africa, it is the same concept. So these Western powers, if they want to come to a country and they know that they can easily control that country and implement some neo-colonial tactics, they will go through those tribal divisions and they'll implement policies that do not meet the interests of the people. And that's how they've been manipulating. That's how almost in every conference where I've had the opportunity to present, I've always told people that, yes, back in the past, these people used to gather together and divide Africa and do all these things. But right now, as we speak, the ball is in the court of Africa. The ball is in our court. Nobody is going to come and force any country in Africa and say, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. That time has passed. Now we are the one allowing ourselves being manipulated by the West. Because they are coming through means that we can actually fight and stand against it and say, no, we are not going to go into this kind of trade agreement. We're not going to allow this political influence. We're not going to allow this political or cultural imperialism. We are going to trade with you with equal partners. You can do that in this present dispensation. But what do? Because of our corrupt politicians and tribal systems and tribalism and all whatnot, we continue to fall prey to Western powers because of what we are discussing today. That's what the problem is.
Thank you immensely, Dr. Elijah. I'll be coming back to you. There is this saying in Africa that it's better to have African solutions to African problems. We'll be dissecting that further. Back to you, Dr. NJIX. You listen to your co-panelists. I know you might have something to add up to that, but according to Dr. Elijah, he thinks that, tribalism was institutionalized by colonial powers in Africa, or is a means to which they can be able to defeat Africans. But from your perspective, though we have come to a point where we agree that, yes, a strategy that is used in the African continent, Can you tell us, can Pan-Africanism, amid all these challenges, can Pan-Africanism really survive in the continent, where we still have some of the systems that are holding the continent back?
Yeah, it is a permanent battle, right? It's a permanent battle. And then, as we know, we have experienced, different systems of exploitations and oppression in Africa. Slavery, colonialism, apartheid, and today we talk about neocolonialism, another variant of neocolonialism in the context of the Francophone African countries called France-Afrique, even another concept called Euro-Africa. So we have all those systems, and then it is not easy. And Dr. ENOAKU gave a number of elements. I just want to add a few things. So it's like when he said that there are some conditionalities or strings attached, but I will say that it is done intentionally. That's why in the beginning I was talking about collective colonialism. That's why I wanted to go and define neocolonialism according to Kwame Nkrumah's book. Everything that they do, they're doing that intentionally. The features of colonialism are similar to the features of the global structure today. So we talk about the IMF, when we talk about the World Bank today, we talk about, he spoke about the multinationals. In the past, during colonial time, they used to call that concessionary companies. So the system is the same. So that's why, so everything that they're doing, they do that intentionally. When African countries were about to become independent, they came with some bilateral agreements. France, because I'm from Ivory Coast, was trying to have some agreement with Ivory Coast, Senegal, Mali, or you know what, we want to have some security agreements so that, you know, we can put our military base on your soil, and then we can protect the president, and we can help you like in the territorial security of your country. This is on the level of security. Later on, they came with what people call now the Samoa Agreement. It was called the Cotonou Agreement. It has been put into place since the early years of independence. They want to promote economic integration on the global stage. But when you go and deep down and then you analyze the Cotonou Agreement, listen, it is completely against the integration of African economies. So this is another system. And when we talk about the IMF today, two things I want to talk about. When they saw that Ibrahim Traoré from Burkina Faso was promoting self-sufficiency and self-reliance, they wanted, I'm talking about the IMF and the World Bank, they wanted to give some loans in order somehow to try and then control the process of development in Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso refused the loans, and they say they're promoting internal mobilization of funds in order to sustain and support the development. As they were doing that with Burkina Faso, in the case of Senegal, when they saw that the puppet of neocolonialism, Macky Sall, who did a lot of money embezzlement in Senegal, who increased, you know, the debt of Senegal, when they realized that a Pan-Africanist party, led by Ousmane Sonko, rose to power, they started using their strategy in order somehow to break the spirit of self-sufficient Senegal. So till today, the IMF refused to give some loans to Senegal. And in 1 year, Senegal managed in order to raise some funds on the Western African market, also within Senegal, and also trying to get some money from people who have stolen money when Macky Sall was in power. So these are many of the strategies that they use. But now, when we know that this is the reality, we have to have something in mind. We are dealing with all the strategies and also fighting with our own demons. Tribalism is one of our demons. Corruption is one of our demons. As we are fighting with our own demons, we have to know that Pan-Africanism, it is a powerful force and it is a global force. that allowed Africans and people of African descent to survive slavery, to survive segregation, to survive colonialism. And it is a dream, it's a vision. And then when we see, for instance, the mobilization to free Gbagbo from the International Criminal Court, or when we go back to the global movement against apartheid, or when we see today, that the strong Pan-African consciousness to support the Sahel states or to support Senegal, or to talk about that economic sovereignty that Malema has been talking about, we know that Pan-Africanism is the only force that help us survive the system. It is also the only force that can help us survive all its be neocolonialism, be corruption, be tribalism. So Pan-Africanism is making a lot of progress, and then we will be fighting, and then till the generation can really implement the United States of Africa. Maybe we will not be there, but it is.
Speak. You mentioned earlier on that the agenda in Africa is many a time is not being set by Africans themselves. So if Africa,
let me make a very dire statement. Some people might agree with me, some people might disagree with me. Africa has no trading friends as we speak. And I will back it up with data. When the African Free Trade Agreement was announced, you could see that there was pandemonium in the Western world.
Yeah, exactly.
When the African Free Trade Agreement was announced, there was pandemonium. The North American Free Trade Agreement, people were asking, what does that mean for us? How are we going to trade with Africa if that happens? The European Union were contacting individual countries in Africa and asking them, what is going to happen with a partnership with you if this free trade agreement between African countries happens that Africa is going to trade at one single block? Why was that fear? Let me explain to you why that fear was. Africa is dealing with $3 trillion economy. That's a gigantum in terms of the economy. If Africa was to trade with itself, this is my number one recommendation. African countries do not trade with themselves. The level of trade barriers between African countries, I can tell you that it is easy to find an African product in France. Let's say it is easy to find a Cote d'Ivoire product in France than to find a Cote d'Ivoire product in Cameroon or in Nigeria. And the next door neighbor, Nigeria, it is easy to find a Nigerian product in the United States than to find a Nigerian product maybe in Senegal and so on. Why? Because African countries don't trade among themselves. As long as you do not trade among yourself, there is what we call capital flights from the continent of Africa.
Yes.
So that is number one thing that I would recommend for African countries. Africa should implement the Pan-African Free Trade Agreement. Let it be functional. Trade among yourself. Let the capital of Africa remain within Africa. Let it circulate within Africa. As long as that has not been implemented, it is going to be very difficult to overcome some of these things that the Western world has embarked on to put upon ourselves. Number two, I already talked about this a little bit, and my friend Dr. Nikala, if I remember, mentioned that a little bit. If you see the few African countries that have refused foreign aid, if you look at Ibrahim Traore, for example, how did he succeed to do what he's doing in his country, in Burkina Faso, after rejecting foreign aid? What he did was, number one, he built confidence in the internal market. When you build confidence in the internal economy, you are going to have local investors invest in that economy. He was able to raise billions for the Burkina Faso economy, not from foreign investors, but from internal investors. And that's what he's doing right now. The investment that's happening in Burkina Faso is not from IMF. He rejected their loan. But he is still going on with massive investment in his country. That is what I want African economists, politicians, and their leaders to do. Make sure that you build confidence in the local economy before you go out to look for foreign investors who will come in with strings attached. That's the number two problem. Number three problem is what we already talked about. Yes, there's tribalism and so on and so forth. But the way the Western powers come into Africa is they will use our weaknesses and manipulate that against us. If you look at what is happening in the Eastern Congo, for example, the tribal war that's happening in Eastern Congo, where you have Kivu and all these other people, and you have all these M23, you have all these whatever, all these groups that are fighting. Why are they fighting? In the Eastern Congo, you have the greatest amount of deposit of minerals that is going to be used for the boom that is coming forward in AI and technology and so on. Those minerals, the greatest deposit of minerals in the world is found in Western Congo. So what do? These guys come in, give weapons to all those tribal groups, they fight and kill themselves, and then they exploit the minerals. That's what's happening. So what is the solution to this? These guys are using poverty in order to fight us. They know that the local population is poor and the government has lost control of that part of the country. Therefore, they go in and wreak havoc. Our people need to understand that at the end of the day, if these things are exploited for the benefits of everybody, the average person will not remain poor. The average person will not remain poor. Our people need to understand that when we remove these strings that we attach between countries in terms of trading, at the end of the day, there will be transfer of technology. If we have Nigeria that seems to be the power of Africa right now, they are good in one area of the technology, but they are not good in the other sector of technology. They will easily transfer between countries that are better in one aspect. So there will be this transfer of knowledge and technology within these economies and so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, all African economies will benefit. So remove the strings, remove the custom duties, remove the trading barriers between African countries and let African countries trade among themselves. And then lastly, before I give you the microphone, tribalism is a dangerous cankerworm. And how did that tribalism come about? It was implemented by Europeans. Sometimes you have borders that were, drawn across families in Africa. You draw borders on this side of the family, one country, you have one family in one country and a family in the other country. Africa needs to understand that when we are united, regardless of our imaginary borders that have been drawn by the Europeans, an African is an African. I should find myself in Nigeria, I feel comfortable home. If I find myself in Kenya, I feel comfortable home. All this xenophobic attitude, like what we see in South Africa, it is for the service of Africa, not for the service of Africa. Once we have that in mind, I'm telling you, Africa will be the El Dorado of the world.
Exactly, and Africa can stay united. That's why we'll have conversations like this, Dr. Elijah. Hopefully, we shall be able to bring more concrete suggestions to the table. Now, moving on to you, Dr. NJIX, you share, apparently, both of you, Dr. Elijah and yourself, share the same view about, Africans being united for the greater good of the continent. Moving forward, from your perspective, what is the most effective way of, young Africans today being able to learn from some of the challenges that were recorded in the era of, I could say, resulting from tribal biases on the African continent and the neocolonial systems to champion the continent forward? Earlier on, you spoke of corruption. So those are some of the issues that have been noticed on the African continent for such a long time. But aside all this, how can we be able to bring together or put in place policies that will reflect what Africa wants to be?
Okay. So for me, the most important thing, Dr. ENOAKU was talking about how Africa needs to trade
amongst themselves.
Yes, so yeah, it is important, of course, but before that, we need to promote a stronger Pan-African vision. It is when people understand that when we talk about Pan-Africanism, it's not a slogan. It is not to insult the Europeans. But it is a concept that can improve our lives. When people understand that, then we can do what Dr. ENOAKU was talking about. Why today somebody who has a product in the United States, why a singer in the United States can make billions of dollars, or why somebody in Nigeria can put on the market, let's say, release a song, and the person can be prosperous. Why? Why somebody does the same thing in Ivory Coast, the person may not have as much as the Nigerian. The reason is it's about the demographics. There are more than 200 million people in Nigeria. It is a market bigger than the 30 million people market of Ivory Coast. So when we are talking about Pan-Africanism, and then when we see today that many Africans are coming together, even on the level of the consciousness, when a song is released today in Cameroon, we can see that some people in Ivory Coast, Senegal, they embrace that, something in Burkina Faso. So as we do that, we are getting rid of those imaginary borders to build a market in Africa that we can use for us in order to trade and produce things that we can consume ourselves, and for us in order to try and be prosperous like in this world. So the most important thing, the first, is to come with a stronger Pan-African consciousness. When you have a stronger Pan-African consciousness, then you claim sovereignty. So when you claim sovereignty like Kwame Nkrumah did, like Thomas Sankara did, like Ousmane Sonko and in Senegal, when you claim sovereignty like the Celtic, then you do something according to the vision of self-reliance and self-determination. And then you're not going to be looking outward, you're going to try and look inward, collecting funds, and then in order for you to people. And now, one thing that is very important that I want to talk about before I go to the methodology, because I started with the methodology, but there's something I don't want to forget. Today, we are at a defining moment in the history of Africa. And then as I was talking with my friend Maurice Kane at the Congo yesterday, and he told me, and I agree with him, that the Pan-African consciousness that we are witnessing today, we have not seen such things like this. This is what he said. That I may rectify a little bit and say, for instance, that when there was the Free Nelson Mandela's movement, there was like a great mobilization. So since the Free Nelson Mandela's movement until today, the mobilization about the Pan-African consciousness that we're seeing, we have not seen that. I'm not talking about the era of Kwame Nkrumah, Modibo Keïta, Ben Bella, Gamal Abdel Nasser, Jules Nyerere. I'm not talking about Sékou Touré. I'm not talking about the late 50s and the early 60s. But now, why I am saying that? So if today we have Mali, we have Niger, we have Burkina Faso, and then we have Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and then we have Senegal, and then we have Ghana, because based on the information that we are receiving, there seem to be the president of Ghana, Mahamat Dramani, and the prime minister of Senegal, or the president of Senegal, they think that we still need to think about doing things together, be the members of the Sahel states or be the members of ECOWAS. So then it means that those countries beyond the Sahel states can be the nucleus of an integrated Pan-African development, or the nucleus of the Africa that we want to see as articulated in the Agenda 2063. So it is a great moment. Now, that's why people like us, because of the impression that people give us that we are so divided along ethnic lines, along linguistic lines, along many other elements, we think that there are some paradigms that when we adopt them, we can reduce the challenges and the hurdles in our way to build the unity of Africa. Pan-Africanism is, of course, the biggest paradigm, but beside Pan-Africanism, we are promoting that value system that we can see in different African countries with different names. That's why we go back to the Ubuntu philosophy. It predated colonialism, it predated slavery, it survived slavery, it survived colonialism, and then when we come together and we think that, okay, we have, we call it, it's about humanism, we have Ubuntu in South Africa, we have Nmambudu with the Igbo in Nigeria, we have the Abantu with Uganda, Untu in Kenya, Burkindi in Burkina Faso, Nite in Senegal. When we know that it is the same concept with the same, almost like the same name almost everywhere, we can see that around that paradigm, we are claiming our common identity, we are claiming our culture, we are claiming the ancient Egyptian civilization, and we are claiming our common purpose and our common future. So for me, it is a methodology. That's why everywhere I go, when I talk about the importance of Ubuntu as a paradigm to build an integrated development of Africa or to build the unity of Africa. So, and now, around Ubuntu, we can think about a new model of production for a new African economy, a new African Ubuntu economy, and then based on self-sufficiency, self-reliance, and this is how I think we can survive with the involvement of the masses and the people who can claim on the local level that vision of Ubuntu economy. So that is my perspective.
Thank you immensely, Dr. NJIX. Indeed, Ubuntu, I am because you are, and you are because I am. Back to you, Dr. Elijah. Your co-panelist, he maintains the point of view or the standpoint that Pan-Africanism is the way forward. You know, Africans living together as one people should be the way forward. Now, from your own perspective, having listened to the points he outlined so far, what do you think about Africans, especially the youth? What are some of the things that they can do to unlearn the tribal biases that already exist in the bid to challenge the neo-colonial systems that are present in Africa?
Thank you for that question. With due respect to my learned colleague, I know he's a historian, and I agree on the point that he has mentioned, but I will beg his permission to differ a little bit. One of the issues that we have seen is that all habits die hard. All habits, especially with Africans, die hard. And when people begin to identify themselves as the Nkata of South Africa, the Zulus of South Africa, the whatever of Igbo, the whatever of Yoruba, the whatever, sometimes it is like a double-edged sword. It is true that we use that to identify our Ubuntu spirit in Africa, but I beg to differ a little bit. I would go away from those appellations and say an African is an African. Whether you don't have any tribal, strong tribal, because there's some groups that do not have that strong tribal connection and do not identify themselves as the Nkata or the Ubuntu or whatever it is, an African is an African. If I find myself on the streets of Paris, immediately identify my brother as an African, that's what matters to me. If I find myself in the streets of Yaoundé, immediately I identify my brother as an African, that's what's important to me. If I find myself in Nairobi, Kenya, immediately I jump there and I see my brothers, that's what's important to me. I want to a little bit differ and go away from those tribal affiliations that is what is going to unite us. Because the reality that we have seen on the ground in Africa is that those tribal affiliations in Africa has always been the cause of disunity in Africa. They've always been the cause of conflict, people identifying themselves in a particular way, different from a different tribe, and that has always brought conflicts and problems on the continent of Africa. I would say, let us just be Africans. Let's understand that we have one common economy, the African economy. Let the spirit of Kwame Nkrumah, Burkina Faso's Thomas Sankara, Nelson Mandela, let it sweep across Africa and let us be Africans without instincts of the Nkata, the Igbos, the Yorubas, the whatever you call in Cameroon and so on and so forth. The moment we get so tied to those tribal roots, again, people should not misunderstand me. I'm not saying that we're going to forget about our roots, where we come from and so on, but I'm saying the overriding principle should be the African economy, the African people. We're not going to forget our roots and our culture, of course, but again, history has told us that too much emphasis on our tribal roots has not served Africa well. It has served Africa in a very wrong way. It has rather divided us. So to me, I'll look at Africa as one big people, one person. Doesn't matter where you find yourself, doesn't matter the tribe where you come from, so that the Africa that we all aspire, like Mr. Malema in South Africa always says, an Africa is an African. In Nairobi is the same African. In Yaoundé is the same African. In Lagos is the same African. Everywhere he or she finds themselves. That should be our guiding principle in Africa, to go away from all these tribal related conflict that we have on the continent of Africa that is being exploited by the Western world for their own evil ends. That is just a little difference that I want to differ with my colleague there. Now, back to your question now. How do we move forward? There's corruption that's befalling us, for sure, on the continent of Africa. How does this corruption persist? If we diagnose how corruption goes on in Africa, it is also tied to this tribalism. You will find people from a particular tribe that will hang on to power, and they will collect people from their own tribe and say, make sure that you protect power, because if power is taken away from you, our tribe will go down. That's what they're using. If we go away from this concept of tribalism in Africa, I'm telling you, people will look at the best candidate. It doesn't matter which part of the region you come from. It doesn't matter which tribe you come from. As long as we know that this person is going to deliver, like what we have in Senegal, what we have in Burkina Faso, even though that was not democracy, but it still delivers. Doesn't matter if the person comes to power through what means, as long as the person is delivering, those are the leaders that we want in Africa. So I would say, let Africa, like I said right from the beginning, focus on what their strong suit are. For example, Senegal, Burkina Faso, Niger, they have focused on agriculture. That is the strong suit of Africa right now. And in dealing with the Western world, what they are saying is, if you look at what Burkina Faso is doing now, they're dealing with Russia and say, okay, Russia, we know that you are very strong, your economy is very strong in terms of agriculture. Why don't you bring us these technologies, agriculture technologies that is going to help us become, number one, self-sufficient? Because if you're not, first of all, self-sufficient, and you still need to buy food to eat from the Western world, you still need to buy matches. Can you imagine that? Stick matches from the Western world. How can you even how can you be talking about independence? How can you be talking about an economy that's resilient? So build on your the strong side of the economy. Make sure that you are building on things that give you a competitive advantage. Our competitive advantage right now is not technology. We are going to develop our technological sector, but our competitive advantage right now is agriculture. We build on it, we have that as our base, and then we can compete with the rest of the world in terms of developing our our technological sector, developing our minerals by ourselves and so on. And number two, what the African Union, part of the 17-point, if I remember, 17 or 16-point agenda is that raw material should not leave Africa without being finished or even semi-finished. That is another key point that is killing us in Africa, that the Western world is capitalizing on and bringing tribalism, neocolonialism and all these things. If we just implement, I'm telling you, Sharon, 50% of the core pillars of Agenda 2063, that is on that agenda, just 50% of it, Africa will be way, way more advanced than what we have today. The problem is that we have policies in place, we have all these beautiful design projects in place, but there is nobody carrying it ahead and taking the lead. That's why we always say that the African Union seems to be a toothless bulldog as we speak. Everything is on paper, there is no concrete action on the ground. And that is where our problem is.
Thank you immensely, Dr. Elijah. But ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us, this is Talking Point on 4U Media Africa, and the conversation continues. Back to you, Dr. NJIX. You said you have something to add. Please, could you react to that, please? Dr. NJIX, if you have something to say, then we proceed with the next question.
But yeah, no, so I see my video is acting up, but can you hear me? People may not see me for a second, but I'm going to respond. Okay, so I was saying, I understand, you know, Dr. ENOAKU and I, you know, we're having a great, so I think that he misunderstands me. And so that's why I want to bring some clarification. And also maybe I did not communicate properly, maybe because I was rushing. So what I want to share with Dr. ENOAKU is that we are not just that we are fighting in Africa, multidimensional. One of those battles, it is about the ideas. I'm having a problem with my Zoom. Okay, can you see me?
Please proceed, sir.
Hello?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Please proceed.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. So one of the problems that we have is that everything that we are talking about, neocolonialism, neoliberalism, all the tricks and then strategies that the Europeans are putting into place in order to maintain their dominance over the world, particularly in the interaction with Africa, they are claiming some value systems. They are claiming some ideologies. And then, yes, I do history, but of course, you know, because I meet people like Dr. ENOAKU and many others, so I have somehow to, you know, adjust and update, you know, my research interest. So World War I and World War II, what was at the center of those two wars was the issue of nationalism, which takes us to the question of ideology. Same way after World War II, with fascism, the Europeans tried to suppress fascism, and then they started promoting other ideologies. Socialism was, of course, in that fight with capitalism, and then capitalism on the economic aspect was going to become economic liberalism, and today we talk about neoliberalism. My point is that in the context of Africa, the development that we want to implement, we need to claim an endogenous value system around which not only we need to think about the unity of Africa, we need to think about the political unity of Africa. We need also to promote an economic system based on our value systems. There are many value systems in Africa. We don't have enough time today to talk about why I am talking about Ubuntu. Yes, you can be an African. When you talk about Ubuntu, which is about humanism, which is about the spirit of community that we can see in every African culture, we can even see in the context of the Muslims that call that concept Umma. When you talk about the people in the northern part of Africa, African collective, that is what we're promoting. So the way they call that in that particular language of this, we have the same concept with the cosine, it is called Ubuntu, and then we have the same concept when we go to the Ndebele, like in Shona, non-Ndebele, Shona in Zimbabwe, it is called Unhu. So my point is that we have a concept that goes beyond our borders, and that we can see the meaning of the different names of that concept in many languages. So that's why I mentioned Zulu. It has been adopted in South Africa as the issue of collectivism. And then when I was talking about Burkina Faso, when I was talking about Mpunga, when I was talking about Mamudu with the Igbo, it does not mean that we don't have same concept in many of other African languages. So I just wanted to clarify that. So it's not about the tribal war. Okay, for instance, let's say we go to Dr. ENOAKU and I, let's say we want to put together a football, like a team to go and play football. We're going to choose our best. Like in every field on the field. If we want to choose the goalkeeper, we have to choose the best goalkeeper among 4 or 5 goalkeepers. So in the term of paradigms, Ubuntu is the most popular, the most accepted and adopted in Africa. That's why we are claiming it. That's why Burkina comes from Burkindi. So I just wanted to tell you. So, when we have time, we can continue the conversation, and then maybe we can compare notes after the TV show, okay? So yeah, just what I want to say. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nyaka. We're coming back to you. Time for me to get Dr. Elijah. Yeah, we've acknowledged the fact that, enough is not yet leaders. The responsibility of taking Africa forward does not lie entirely or solely on the shoulders of leaders across Africa. It's something that every African has a role to play. We mentioned that enough is not done when it comes to dismantling the African continent from this tribal-based politics or still the foreign dependency that exists on the African continent. But one thing I'd like to find out is, with all these, things that are going on in Africa, the question I'm asking is, what is that one thing, from your opinion, that Africans must radically rethink if they need to take the continent forward?
Okay. It wouldn't be one thing. I would say there are a couple of them. To win Africa, I would say, number one, this might not sound a concept that a lot of people might buy, but I would say that if you look at Kwame Nkrumah, Kwame Nkrumah was an African diaspora before he went home and started this. If you look at the Mandelas and all these other people, Africa has not sufficiently harvested the power of its diaspora. And in some cases, Africa has actually antagonized its diaspora. And we've seen that. If you see the amount of money that flows into the African continent from the African diaspora, it is astronomical. And if you compare that to the Chinese, for example, some of us that study in the Western world, by the time we were finishing our postgraduate education, Chinese students already had their government lining up where they were going to be employed and working and doing research and so on. But in Africa, the African diaspora is being looked upon in some countries like an enemy. And they are being chased away and so on and so forth. And you find Africans, this is not an anomaly, I'm giving you real concrete cases. Africans that will finish their postgraduate education in Africa, either they prefer to remain in the Western world, or they prefer to go to countries like, I have an African that has a big company in Taiwan, what is it called? South Korea, a big engineering company. And the story is that he went back, I don't want to call the name of the country. He went back to his home country to start this company and so on. After his graduate education, there were taxes that were imposed on him. There were so many things. It took him almost a year to get a license to practice and so on. So he got fed up, left his home country and went to South Korea and started this company, and he's doing so well. And it's in Africa. And there are many cases like that. So Africa needs to harness the power of its diaspora to involve them in the revitalization and transformation of the African continent. That's number one. Number two, I already mentioned that Africa needs to wean itself off from foreign, Africa is drunk for foreign aid. Africa is just drunk for foreign aid. You can imagine a country like Nigeria. We just heard recently that Nigeria succeeded to pay their debts to the IMF and so on, almost all. And immediately they finished paying that debt, there was a huge loan that was offered them, which they actually requested, and they took it. You pay debt and you go into debt. You pay debt and you go into debt. That tells me that Africa is so hungry for debt in such a way that if something is not done, this cycle of poverty will be very, very difficult to cut. Number three is the issue of transformation of raw materials. There is so much value in the transformation of raw materials, such that if Africa was just to transform its raw materials to semi-finished product, we are not even talking about finished products here. I will give an example of cocoa that my friend from Cote d'Ivoire knows very well. That is the economy of Cote d'Ivoire is almost hinged on cocoa, production of cocoa. If they cannot transform that cocoa to at least cocoa powder before selling it to the Western world, that is a loss of resources and capital from the Cote d'Ivoire economy, so much that if care is not taken, imagine that that same cocoa is produced in Cote d'Ivoire, transported and sent out to the Western world, then they produce chocolate and sell to the same country at almost 10 times the price of a kilogram of that same cocoa. But if you were to semi-finish it and send the powder to be processed you have recouped almost 50% to 60% of that capital flight from your country. So Africa should invest on semi-finished product instead of just mining and sending to the world, cut timber and send to the Western world, take cocoa and send to the Western world, take rubber and send to the Western world, take coffee and send to the Western world. They should semi-process those products on the soil of Africa before sending it to the Western world. Number four, Africa should trade as equal partners. I see no reason, because in this modern economy now, nobody brings a gun and put on your head and say, I must buy you must sell your minerals to me. You must sell this, you must sell to me. It has to be on equal basis. It is true that we are lacking in technology right now. Africa can come to the negotiating table and say, we have the minerals, we have the raw products, you have the technology. But what's going to happen is that we are going to employ you, you are going to be the employer, you are going to be the exploiter of this mineral, but on the basis that you are going to transfer that technology to our engineers, technicians, economists, our local people, in such a way that
win-win partnership.
10 to 15 years from now, that same company should be run by locals. A company will run in Africa for 50 years, and within that 50 years, you still have foreigners running that company. No engineers from that country, no technicians from that country, no people from that country running that economy. That is not sustainable. That is not how you're going to build that economy, because where do they invest that money? They invest that money back in the country. And not only that, where are the shareholders? The shareholders are Europeans. Where do they invest their resources? They'll invest it in their own country. It's not in Africa that they're going to invest. So Africa must come to that point where they take control of what they have, they build on their competitive advantage, and then they can work as equal partners with the rest of the world. That is how Africa is going to win itself off of this issue that we are discussing here.
Indeed, having win-win partnerships, like it's often said, no country or no continent is isolated. Back to you, Dr. NJIX, just to wrap up today's conversation, just to remind that was Dr. Elijah Onwoku who was commenting. Albert is still responding in his capacity as the Director of the Center for Africa Development. Now, we're gradually coming to the end of today's conversation. Dr. NJIX, when you listen to Dr. Elijah, we've come to a point where we acknowledge that there is this dire need on the African continent for Africans themselves to rethink the ideologies that exist on the continent, the systems that have been put in place, as far as the alliances, like quoted your co-panelists. Now, at the end of the day, the interest should be the interest of Africans. If all these alliances or all this, we're having this conversation, is to put the interest of Africa first. With that said, from your perspective, what should be the way forward for the African continent?
Okay, thank you very much. So Dr. ENOAKU gave many good answers, and then we agree on most of the things. The only difference is that there's something that he knows, but he forgot to mention it. Because when I listen to him, I know he's a very knowledgeable person. When he was talking about the transformation of our products, before we sell them on the international market. Like I said, he knows that when I listen to him, but he did not see it. So I want to say that before I give some other elements to your question. For me, the most important thing is not so much to trade with the outside world, right? We need to promote an African domestic market. When I did my research, then based on my reading, we know, for instance, that the intra-trade in each regional African grouping, be the West Economic Monetary Union, be SADC, be many others regional groupings, the intra-trade does not go beyond 20%. So then you can see that's number one. And number two is that the manufactured product that we produce in Africa, most of the time, the takers are African countries, most of the time. In other words, so if we do manufacture products, we know that we can sell them in Africa first, as we're talking about Africa first, and then we need to try and see how we can promote the African domestic market before even thinking about the European, because the competition is going to be too difficult on the international market. If they don't want us to transform our cocoa, they're not going to allow us to produce chocolate, the powder that my brother was talking about, for us to sell that on the international market. So in other words, I think I heard a couple of weeks ago that Ivory Coast is finally Ivory Coast just created, after 60-some years of independence, Ivory Coast just created a company to manufacture cocoa for the first time. It is an aberration. Another aberration is the fact that Ivory Coast and Ghana, both of them represent more than 60% of the production of cocoa, and they don't harmonize, the policies around cocoa. So for me, these are like step-by-step action that people have to do in that particular field of cocoa or chocolate. So I go back to what we said in the beginning, as we are wrapping up. For me, the first thing we have to do, everything that Dr. ENOAKU is talking about, yes, it is important, but like he said, we need to have visionary leaders. We need to have vision leaders who believe in the Pan-African consciousness, who claim sovereignty, and who are people of integrity. Well, for me, that's the beginning. And now we need to have the involvement of the masses. If today a country like Togo, which was not a traditional a country that promoted Pan-Africanism, is thinking about Pan-Africanism today, it is because of the struggles. It is because of the contributions of masses of Africans, the people of African descent, and leaders in power. They have to adjust. In other words, we need to do the same thing when it comes to development. The state or the leaders of the state should not be the only one to think about the development of Africa. We need the involvement of different communities. That's why I was talking about the involvement of the communities in that development that we are thinking about. So if we do that, of course, based on the Pan-African consciousness and the Pan-African vision, with leaders, we have like the moral capital, and then who do not go to power to do money embezzlement. Then everything, and we promote self-sufficiency, self-reliance. You feed yourself, you feed your neighbor, you produce some products made in Africa that you sell first in Africa. For me, that is the way forward. And in a few years, we can make a big change in Africa. And today we have the historical opportunity to have 5 or 6 countries that can come together and then think about this same Pan-African thing we're talking about.
Indeed,
Thanks.
Africa first at all times. Thank you immensely. That was Dr. LAGOKE, the founding member of the Convention of Pan-Africanism and Progress, and also Associate Professor of History at Lincoln University. Thank you so much, Dr. Nyaka, for taking our time to be with us today. I equally say thank you, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU, for taking out time to join us and, of course, share your insight on this edition of Talking Point.
Thanks for having me.
Meanwhile, time constraints, hopefully we'll be able to, have more conversations that will drive a change across the African continent. Meanwhile, we've come to the end of today's edition of Talking Point over 4U Media Africa. Thank you for watching. We believe you learned a lot from today's conversation. We equally appreciate those who listened via the airways of FM 96.3 4U Radio and those that are following us on social media. Thank you so much, and have a beautiful day in company of our numerous programs.